Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And for today's episode, we're going to go back to 2023 to take a quick look at one of my top 10 favorite records from last year, that being the self-titled release by Pacific Northwestern power popsters True Stars. Now, True Stars are a band that hail from Bellingham, Washington. This band features former Moral Crux guitarist Jody Waymeyer. This is a band that I am not only a pretty big fan of, but a band that I have somewhat of a personal connection to. You see, I have known True Stars frontman Jody Waymeyer for many years. I first met Jody back during my time living in Seattle when he first came to work at a place that I had been employed at for many years. He was sort of a friend of friends, and he instantly became one of my favorite coworkers because this guy is as big a music dweeb as you can find out there in the wild, and I found him to be so much fun to have conversations with during our downtime at work. Now, he and I didn't necessarily agree on everything, but the guy has an encyclopedic knowledge of music, which is one reason why I was so excited when I found out that he was forming this new band, and that this new band had begun releasing material, because it is my opinion, at least, that in order to be a good musician, you have to have sort of a good ear for music. It is the same sort of idea when people say that in order to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And Jody Waymeyer, for the most part, I would say has pretty spot-on taste when it comes to music. Now, like I said, he and I didn't necessarily agree on everything back in those days. Nor should you agree with everything that anybody says, but he was somebody that I used to just love our little dweeb out sessions. And I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you that he and I were necessarily the snuggest of chums back in those days, but we did hang out outside of work a few times, and I look back at those times with a lot of nostalgia, because the conversations that he and I had always went very deep into music, and they became very passionate and sometimes a little bit divisive, dare I say. But I actually went to one of the most interesting shows that I've ever been to in one of my nights hanging out with Jody. He took me to this place in Seattle called the Tractor Tavern, which to this day remains one of my favorite music venues of all time, and he was taking me to see this band that he knew of that I had never heard of. And this band was called Beatallica. Now, if you're aware of Beatallica, you know that this is a band that plays Beatles songs in the style of Metallica, and Jody from Moral Crux and True Stars thought it was something that I would enjoy. It was an opportunity for he and I to hang out outside of work and, go see some music and probably get into one of our conversations thereabouts. So we went down to the Tractor Tavern and we saw this band, Beatallica, and they came out on stage, and, pretty much right away it was a situation where this band comes out, and I'm not exactly sure what song it was that started off the set, but basically they go into something like Yellow Submarine, but they're doing it in the style of Metallica, and this band had a pretty good Metallica sound, and their frontman did a pretty good, Papa Het impression. So I remember standing there thinking to myself that at the time this was a band I didn't even know existed, but I remember thinking to myself, yeah, okay. It's pretty much as advertised. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. But, at first I thought it was relatively entertaining. It was sort of funny for a while. Now, I'm somebody who has sort of a limited attention span when it comes to funny music. I mean, even somebody like Weird Al, now I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings out there, but even Weird Al, the fact that Weird Al has been doing what he's been doing for almost 50 years just kind of blows me away. Now, Weird Al, in in the spirit of full transparency, when I was a little kid, Weird Al was my favorite ever recording artist. I was obsessed with that guy. But as a man now, in my 40s, I don't necessarily see the appeal, and I don't understand how Weird Al has been as popular as he's been for, like I said, nearly 50 years. I would make the argument that Weird Al might even be more popular now than he's ever been, because to me, he's sort of like a stand-up comedian that tells one joke over and over and over again. And that was sort of my impression of this band Beatallica. Once you saw them play 3 or 4 songs, you kind of got the joke. You kind of got the gist of it. But this band went on for like 2 hours, and judging by the other attendees at the show, I felt as if I was in the minority, because every other person was absolutely riveted by this band's performance. And after a few songs, I felt like, okay, I kind of get it, I kind of understand. There's no need for these guys to keep playing for 2 hours. Now, I'm pretty sure that Beatallica are still active. They are a band that is from Wisconsin. I know that. And they do sort of continue to tour endlessly. And they have droves of fans. So I'm admitting that I am probably in the minority. But after a while, the joke had kind of run its course. The band that opened for Beatallica, I remember that, I'll never forget that too, was a band, I believe they were called Stay Tuned. And they had sort of a gimmick as well, this band Stay Tuned. They were a sort of pop punk band who did pop punk versions of 80s sort of sitcom themes. And it was the same thing, where I remember thinking to myself, okay, this is kind of funny at first, but after a while the joke had kind of run its course. And as I was standing there, waiting for them to play the greatest theme from the greatest sitcom of all time, let alone the 80s, but the greatest sitcom of all time, WKRP in Cincinnati, I left their set feeling somewhat disappointed because they neglected to play that particular track. Although they did play the theme song from The Facts of Life, which is a sentimental favorite between my best friend Tim and I out in California. So at least they played the theme song from The Facts of Life. But that's not really the point here, is it? Anyway, I was very excited when I found out that my friend Jody was starting this new band called True Stars, and I was very excited when it was announced that this band had a new record coming out. So I kind of paid attention to Jody's social media platforms as much as I do with anybody else. And at a certain point last year, I discovered that the band had released this self-titled release. And I immediately ski-daddled it over to the band's Spotify page, where I began listening to this record in relatively heavy rotation. Like I said, this is probably one of my top 10 favorite records from last year. Now, if you go back and dig sort of deep into the Archaic Records archives, I did do a show last year where I talked about my top 5 favorite records from 2023. This record didn't necessarily make the cut into my top 5, but this is a record that is easily in my top 10 favorite records of last year, not only because of my personal connection to Jody Waymire, but because the music on this record is really that good. I have to admit, though, that I was recently sort of disappointed in myself, which is nothing new. Trust me. If you were me, you would probably be disappointed with yourself on the regular as well. But I just sort of recently discovered, after listening to this album on the streaming services for quite some time, that this album was actually available on vinyl. Now, that was a fact that somehow sort of skated past me when it was originally released. This album was released on a limited run of about 200 copies, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. This is an album that I ordered off of eBay. I know it's also available on the band's Bandcamp page, but I ordered this album on eBay pretty much immediately upon discovering that there was a physical copy of this record floating around. And I remember that as soon as I ordered this record on eBay, I received an email in return from my old friend Jody, who I had sort of lost contact with over the years based on the fact that I move a lot, and that seems to be a pattern in my life where I move to a new city, I make a lot of friends, and then I hightail it out of there. Now, I lived in Seattle for 13 years, so I didn't necessarily, bomb Seattle and then bounce right away. But I'd sort of lost touch with my friend Jody, but he emailed me upon my ordering of this record, and basically we sort of touched base with each other. He thanked me for purchasing his record, which is one of the things that I love so much about small independent music is, you go on these websites, whether it be Bandcamp or apparently eBay, you order these records and you're supporting an artist directly. And man, I could not wait to get my hands on my physical copy of this record. Now, my record is number 78 out of the 200, so this is a record that I will cherish until the day comes when I have enough decency to purchase the farm. This is a record that I have been listening to in extremely heavy rotation since it came out. This is a record that I can't possibly recommend to you enough. If you are a fan of bands like Red Cross, the Muffs, Subsonic, the Charlatans, early Oasis, Mr. T Experience, I think that this is a band that you will love. I think that this is a record that you will very much enjoy. This record has a very sort of diverse soundscape. It sort of flows seamlessly in between a lot of different genres. It's got elements of 60s pop, surf rock, bubblegum, punk, post-punk, pop-punk, Laurel Canyon, grunge, post-grunge, some sort of 90s Britpop. This record is a virtual smorgasbord of different soundscapes, different styles, great songwriting, great musicianship, and really, really excellent production. This record was produced by the band and Chad Yenny, and according to the information that's at least available on Spotify, this record was released on October 6th, 2023. Now, I don't know that that is official. That is just according to this album's page on Spotify. And I got to tell you, if there's one thing, one minor, small grievance I have regarding the physically released version of this record, it is that there is no lyric sheet. Now, that's something that is a very minor quibble with me, if you will, but it's just something that I always love, having the lyrics to these records. Now, I've also been sort of digging around online to see if I can find the lyrics floating around out there. It's been very difficult to find the lyric sheet for this record, but the songs are incredibly well written, incredibly well played. All three of the members of this band are incredible musicians. Of course, this band features my old chum, Jody Waymeyer, on guitar and vocals, as well as bassist Arnold Gallows and drummer Diane McKeston. This is a record that I do believe you will find to be quite enjoyable if you give it an opportunity. Now, I'd be remiss if I did not point out the album's artwork. Now, there's something very, sort of titillating about this album artwork. I mean, it's sort of difficult to put your finger on at first. Actually, it's not really. It's right there. But I love the artwork for this album. Not only is it quite attractive, I must say, but it's just a very striking image. I also love the photography of the band members on the back. I love the font that they have gone with for the band's logo. There are the members of the band. That is Jody, Arnold, and Diane, members of Bellingham Washington's True Stars. Like I said before, this is a record that I can't possibly recommend to you enough. This band, disgustingly, I was literally just looking it up right now before I began filming. This band has 13 listeners on Spotify. Are you shitting me? Do you want to know how many Post Malone has? Would you like to know how many Jelly Roll and Morgan Wallen have? This is disgusting. This is my mission in life, to get this band more coverage, more love, a little bit more discovery, if you know what I mean. Anyway, the first song off of this record is a song called Sing Along. Now, as I mentioned before, this is an album that goes in just like a million different directions sonically. I love the diversity on this record. I love the production. I love the musicianship. There really isn't a bad song on this entire record, which is why I make the claim that this is easily one of my top 10 favorite records from last year. Friendship notwithstanding, you understand, son? Anyway, this song has sort of a garage rock meets sort of 60s beach party. It has great vocals. That was one of the things that really struck me about this record is Jody Waymire's vocals. I actually really love his voice. This song, he sounds kind of like a young, Liam Gallagher. It has great guitar. It has great production on this song. It's very catchy. Ironically, considering the song is called Sing Along, this is a song that kind of makes you want to sing along. Get it? But it's very catchy. It's very clean. It's very crisp. I really love the instrumental track on this song. I think it's a great way to kick off the record. The second song on side one is a song called Smile. Vocally, this song reminds me a little bit more of Tim Burgess from the Charlatans. Now, vocally, I think that Jody Waymire's voice is sort of a cross between those two individuals, kind of a young Liam Gallagher mixed with a Tim Burgess from the Charlatans. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, those two guys are pretty similar, which they are in a way, but this song feels a little bit more Tim Burgess-y, at least to me, but it's got like a real Britpop kind of pop punk kind of vibe. Again, real clean, crisp, snappy, almost snotty kind of production. Again, one thing I wish that I had when it comes to the packaging of this record is the lyric sheets, because I really love to kind of dig into the lyrics. I've always been a big lyric guy, but without the lyric sheet, I don't necessarily want to assume what is being said. That's why I like to have them in my hand as I'm listening to the record. So hopefully at some point in time, now you can't go back and put the lyrics into the physical record, but at some point in time, hopefully these lyrics end up online so you get a little bit more of an idea what's being said. Not that his voice isn't clear, it is, but his voice is sort of back in the mix just a little bit. He doesn't sit, his voice isn't right out front, so it's more kind of part of the mix, so I don't necessarily want to assume and misquote what's being said, but I really like this song a lot. The third song on side one is a song called Sick Thing. This song reminds me of kind of a cross between the Mr. T Experience with some early Oasis, with just a pinch of Seattle 1991 grunge kind of thrown in there. This song is very layered in its production. It's not quite as clean and crisp sounding as the first two tracks. I like it. It's a little bit murkier. It's not quite as defined as the first two songs on this record. It's a little bit heavier, but it is a song that I like a lot. It definitely makes me think of sort of Seattle in the early 90s, and then that kind of like later 90s sort of Britpop with a little bit of Mr. T Experience in there just to add some seasoning. After that is a song called New Confusion. To me, this song sounds a lot like Red Cross, and if I know anything about Jody Waymire from True Stars and Moral Crux, and formerly from a place that I used to work at, which will remain nameless as of right now, I can tell you that Jody Waymire worships at the altar of Red Cross, and he probably has forever. He has certainly as long as I've known him. And I've always thought, and I like Red Cross, don't get me wrong, I'm a Red Cross fan. I've just always found Red Cross to be like an interesting, like, favorite obsessed band. Now, you could probably say the same thing about the Smiths or the big guy, Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey, but I've just always found Red Cross to be an interesting, like, favorite band. Although there is a band, Red Cross, I gotta tell you, that recently has finally started to get some of the notoriety that they so deserve. I was listening to a thing on NPR not too long ago where they did sort of a deep dive into the career of Red Cross, and I thought, man, finally this band is starting to get some of the attention and admiration that they deserve. Now, that being said, they are definitely not my favorite band of all time. Probably not even in my top 100. I like them enough. I've seen them live one time, and they are the Jugs live. But to me, this song is a real homage, a tribute, a love fest for the band. Red Cross. I love the instrumental track on this song. I love the guitar breakdowns. It has a good up-tempo sound. It's got real sort of a snappy art post-pop punk kind of vibe to it. I really love the song New Condition. It's arguably one of my favorite songs on the record. After that is a song called Move My Direction. This is another sort of very, catchy, sing-along type tune. I love this song. To me, this song sounds kind of like the Mamas and the Papas, if they were like in a pop punk band. It reminds me of a cross between like that California Laurel Canyon vibe mixed with, Subsonic, Red Cross, some Mr. T experience. This song is just fun. I love that kind of Laurel Canyon influence. I love that Laurel Canyon music. I mean, to me, the Mamas and the Papas are one of the greatest bands of all time. I love that California sound. I love the Beach Boys. I love Jan and Dean. I love Crosby, Stills and Nash. I love all of that stuff. To me, this is kind of a punk version of a hybrid of all of those bands. It's like Mamas and the Papas meets Crosby, Stills and Nash meets Jan and Dean meets Mr. T Experience, Subsonic, and Red Cross. This is probably... there's a few songs on this record that would sort of be in the running for my favorite, but Move My Direction is pretty close. If it's not my favorite, it's definitely in the top 2 or 3. Anyway, side 1 ends with a song called Panic Attack, sort of appropriately named, because this song kind of sounds like a panic attack. It's a little bit spastic. There's kind of a lot going on. But it still has definition. It isn't sloppy. It isn't necessarily abstract. It's just kind of busy, kind of up-tempo, but it has great guitars. Great guitar breakdowns. Great instrumental track. I love the drumming on this track. I love the bass line on this track. It's a little bit spastic. It's a little bit... I would say, actually, this is probably one of the most unique songs on the record because it is so sort of chaotic, but it's got definition. Like I said, it's not just a wall of chaos. It's got definition. It's not abstract. It's a cool song to end side 1 of the record. It's not... I don't really have a least favorite song on this record, but this would definitely not be my favorite. I do like it, though. I don't really think I have a least favorite song on this record, to be honest with you. Side 2 starts off with a song called Riot For Me. I really like this song a lot. This song sort of reminds me of a cross between Oasis and the Dead Boys. This song has sort of 2 different tempos going on. During the verse of this song, it sounds very Oasis-y. The guitar work and lyrically, this reminds me of something that you would find on What's the Story, Morning Glory, or some of the sort of earlier Oasis records. But during the chorus, it has like a real early punk Dead Boys kind of vibe. So if you've ever wondered what it would be like if Noel Gallagher and Stiv Bators were somehow able to form a band together, I think that the song Riot For Me sort of answers that question. This song reeks of Noel Gallagher throughout the verses, and then it reeks of like Stiv Bators during these sort of more sort of up-tempo, spastic kind of choruses. I really like this song. You think that Oasis and the Dead Boys might be kind of a harsh mix, but it actually works. I really like that song a lot. I'm always maintained that I'm sort of a casual Oasis fan. I like some of their stuff. I'm one of those people, I think, that if you take all of Oasis's catalog and you picked all of the good songs out of what Oasis has done, you could make one and a half, maybe two awesome records. And to me, the song Riot For Me, it sounds kind of like a good Oasis song, like I said, with like kind of a punk bridge or punk chorus thrown in there. I actually like that song a lot. The next song on side 2 is a song called Keep Rolling. To me, this song sounds kind of like a cross between the Archies and Agent Orange, kind of a California surf skate punk song with some sort of 60s beach party influence thrown in there. Why isn't... Maybe I'm wrong, because I'm a big fan, and maybe I'm just don't have my thumb on the pulse of what's going on out there in the world, but why isn't Agent Orange a more celebrated band? That's a band that I need to bring onto the channel. What am I doing? Just wasting my life here. But this song reminds me of the Archies sort of meets Agent Orange. Man, Agent Orange were the Jugs, son. I don't know if that's a band that's still current or not. I had a chance to see Agent Orange many years ago when I was in college. And man, they were snug live. I'm not going to lie to you. That band, I love Agent Orange. That band is awesome. This song is real poppy, catchy. It's got a great instrumental track. I love the bass line in this song. This is probably my favorite bass line of any song on the record. Not that the bass on the rest of the album is anything to sneeze at, because it certainly isn't. But the bass track on this song is the Jugs. I love the song Keep Rolling. It's probably... Oh, man. Might be my favorite song on side 2. It's tough to say, because there's a lot of groceries on this album. I'm not going to lie to you. All right, the next song after that is a song called Why. I really like this song as well. This song has sort of a Nirvana, sort of a specifically incesticide era of Nirvana type sound to it. More specifically, when Nirvana sort of covers the Vaselines. This song has kind of a pop grunge feel to it. Sort of a Beatles meets the Vaselines kind of vibe with a little bit of early grunge thrown in there. I'm going to be the first one to admit that I am not necessarily the world's biggest Nirvana fan. That's something that I know that Jody from the True Stars and I used to talk about a fair amount. He is a huge Nirvana fan. I'm casual. I'm a very casual Nirvana fan at this point in time. Now, talk to me back in high school, I was all in on Nirvana. I'm not going to lie to you. That was a band that was one of my gateway drugs into this whole sort of punk alternative world. But as a man now in his 40s, Nirvana to me are sort of overrated. They get too much of a hand job from the rest of the world. Now, I'm one of those people, when it comes to Nirvana, I'm very curious. Now, this question can't possibly be answered, but I'm very curious as to what would have happened to Nirvana had Kurt Cobain not passed away when the band was arguably the biggest band in the world. Now, would Nirvana have been one of those bands that continued on that trajectory and become bigger and bigger and continued putting out better and better material, because I do believe that In Utero is miles better than Nevermind, which is better than Bleach. I do feel that as the 3 Nirvana studio records were released, they sort of got better with each one. So would Nirvana have continued along that trajectory? Or would they sort of had topped out in terms of both popularity and creativity? And would they have eventually ended up being a band like Stone Temple Pilots or Bush? Just some other mediocre grunge band that hung around way too long? You'll never know. Because Kurt Cobain passed away when this band was at its height. And at the risk of sounding cynical, and this is not meant to sound cynical, I would never make fun of somebody who passes away in the manner that Kurt Cobain did. I don't think it's funny. There are some things that are just in bad taste, to be honest with you. But I will say that dying when you are at the height of your popularity it's good for business. It keeps people interested. So I've always sort of wondered what the future of Nirvana would have been like had Kurt Cobain been able to, get the help he needed and was able to continue moving on, not only in life, which is way more important than his musical career, but, in his musical career as well. But as a man that's in my 40s now, I will say that my favorite album of Nirvana's is Incesticide. Now, I realize that's sort of, basically contradicting what I just said, because I said that the albums got better as Nirvana went along, but I love Incesticide. In fact, I remember I bought Incesticide when it came out because I was in high school. I was a big fan of Nevermind. That was an album that, it sort of changed your life if you were of somebody that was my age, growing up in a small town where you didn't really have access to any sort of underground music world. And I remember buying Incesticide, not really knowing how much of it was covers. In fact, some of my favorite songs off of Incesticide are the, covers of bands like the Vaselines. And at the time, I thought they were just Nirvana songs. But this song reminds me specifically of the Incesticide album by Nirvana. Like I said, I know that Jody is a huge Nirvana fan. Sort of casual at this point in time. I can sort of take him or leave him, to be honest with you. But I love the song. Why? Don't ask me why. All right. Anyway, the next song after that is a song called She Smiles. I really love this song. Also, this song is super catchy. It's got great lyrics. Stylistically, this song kind of reminds me of a cross between the Monkees with a little bit of Mr. T experience, a little bit of, subsonic mixed in there. If the lyrics that I hear in my head when I listen to the song are correct, it kind of reminds me of my relationship with my wife and I, who tends to, project more outwardly a positive, outward appearance, whereas I tend to be a little bit cranky. I'm a little bit more of a curmudgeon, if you will. Not that I'm not a friendly enough guy. I have a job, let me tell you, where I have to be friendly 50 hours a week. And when I'm not at work, sometimes I could be a little bit less than that. But this song sort of reminds me of my wife and I, because she smiles when I sort of refuse to. It's part of the lyrics. I love this song. It is cool. It's catchy. It's fun. I'm a huge fan of the Monkees, as well as the Mr. T Experience and Subsonic. So for me, this has a lot of my bases covered. The final song on this record is called The Hill. Originally, I thought that this song was written about Capitol Hill, which is a neighborhood in Seattle. I'm not saying that it isn't written about that, but if you live in Seattle, for as long as I did, most people refer to Capitol Hill as the Hill. Now, when I lived in Seattle, I only lived on the Hill for 1 year. I spent most of my time in Seattle living down in Belltown. When I first moved to Seattle, I lived way down at the end of 4th Avenue, right next to the Chief Seattle fountain, which was right across the street, basically, from the Space Needle. In fact, I moved to Seattle in September of 1999, and I remember moving into my apartment and looking out the window as I was moving into my apartment, and the Space Needle was just like right there. I remember thinking, like, man, how much more of an iconic Seattle view is this than to be living right next door to the Space Needle? When I moved out of that apartment, I moved up to Capitol Hill for about a year, maybe 2 years, and then I ended up moving back down to Belltown, which is where I spent most of my time. Living in Seattle on 2nd Avenue, right across the street from a legendary music venue in Seattle called the Crocodile, in this apartment building that was called the Rivoli, which was probably my favorite apartment building that I've ever lived in. It was just a punk rock flop house. I mean, it wasn't a communal living experience. Everybody had their own apartments, but everybody that lived there were just awesome. It was all these like punk rockers and scumbags and dirtballs. And in order to get into the apartment building, you sort of had to have an in. You had to either sort of know a resident or you had to be recommended to the super by somebody that you knew. And I worked with this girl who, as I was looking for a new place to live, she was so wonderful to sort of recommend me to the super to move into this place called the Rivoli, which, man, I loved that place. And it was right across the street from the Crocodile and this whole row of bars in Seattle that I haven't been to Seattle now in probably 10 years. I think it was the last time I was in Seattle. Last time I was there, that row of bars was still there, but there was a place called Shorty's. There was a place called the Lava Lounge. There was a place called the Rendezvous. And there's just this whole string of bars down on 2nd Avenue. There's also, back in those days, there was a punk rock record store, which is actually still there. One of my friends was just up in Seattle. He doesn't live there anymore either, but he was just up in Seattle, and there was this punk rock specific record store on 2nd Avenue called Singles Going Steady, which I used to just spend my whole paycheck at, honestly. But fortunately, Singles Going Steady is still there. As far as Shorty's and the Rendezvous and the Lava Lounge, honestly, I don't know if those places are still around, but that neighborhood was just, it was such a awesome home for me for so many years. It makes me homesick and sentimental for Seattle when I think about living on 2nd Avenue. Man, I had so much fun, too much fun back in those days. Let's just be perfectly honest here. I ended up showing up to work hungover way more often than I would care to admit right now. But this song is awesome. I think it's a great way to close out the record. To me, this is another very sort of Nirvana-influenced song. You know, to me, this song is a little bit more influenced by Nevermind Nirvana. Like I said before, the song Why, to me, has more of an Incesticide Nirvana feel to it. This song has like a real kind of like Nevermind era to Nirvana element to it. I saw Nirvana live one time back it was on New Year's Eve, 1993, 1994. In Oakland, California. Again, I mentioned before that Jody from True Stars is a huge Nirvana fan. This is a conversation he and I used to talk about Nirvana a lot because not that I'm a hater, I'm not, but I'm just not on that level when it came to Nirvana. And I got a chance to see Nirvana live only one time on New Year's Eve, 1993, 1994 at the Oakland Coliseum in Oakland. And it was Nirvana, Butthole Surfers, and Chokebore. And I had never heard of the band Chokebore at that point in time. I thought they were good. They were sort of a surf skate punk band, I believe from San Diego, if I'm not mistaken. I remember I bought the CD at Tower Records not long after I went to that show because I thought they were really good live when I saw them, but then I went back and I listened to that Chokebore CD and it just did like nothing for me. The production on that CD, I remember, was terrible too. It was way too quiet, but you know, after they came out, the Butthole Surfers came out and they just tore the place apart. I mean, I think looking back on it, at least in my experience, because I am way more of a Butthole Surfers fan than Nirvana. I mean, it's like not even close. I love the Butthole Surfers. I worship that band. To me, Nirvana, they're fine. They're okay to me. But looking back on it, I think that Nirvana made a huge mistake on that tour having the Butthole Surfers play with them, because the Butthole Surfers came out and they just burned the place down, at least the show I was at on New Year's Eve in Oakland. And Nirvana came out after that. Now, granted, this was not too long before Kurt Cobain passed away. He was clearly in not the best physical, mental, or spiritual shape. That's obvious based on what would happen in April of 1994. But to me, Nirvana were very sort of lackluster. Looking back on it, now at the time, I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But looking back on it now, having been to hundreds of shows in my life, Nirvana were kind of forgettable, to be honest with you. I think they made a big mistake by having the Butthole Surfers open for them. I also remember that night specifically at the New Year's Eve in Oakland, they had Bobcat Goldthwait, who came out, and he was the MC that night. I remember he came out at midnight. They dropped him from the rafters as Baby New Year. Many years later, at this same place that I worked at with Jody from the True Stars, I was at work one day, and I was getting ready to take my lunch break. Now, I'm not somebody who's real strict and stringent about taking my lunch break on time. I don't really eat on my lunch break. I usually either go read or I'll take a lap around the neighborhood. But one of my coworkers came up to me, and he knew that I was packing up to head out to lunch, and he told me, he's like, "Hey man, you need to go deal with this next client." And at first I was sort of, I remember it was a crazy busy day, and I was just sort of like, I was needing a break more than anything else. And I was just like, are you serious? I was like, why? Why do I have to do it? And he's like, no man, you have to deal with this next guy. You'll understand when you see who it is. And so the place I worked at, we had this list, and people would come in and they would write their name on the list, and you would call them in the order that they showed up. It was basically first come, first serve for the most part. And I was like, fine, I'll deal with this guy. And my coworker's like, it'll be real easy. It looks real quick, but you got to deal with this guy specifically. And I was like, fine. So I went up there and I looked at the list, and I remember the name was Bob. So I was like, Bob? And this guy stands up and he starts coming over towards me. And at first I didn't quite recognize him, although I could sense that I sort of had a feeling like I've seen this person before or something like that. And I take him over to where I'm working, and he sits down, and it hits me immediately that this is Bobcat Goldthwait. And I remember I looked over at my coworker who encouraged me to take this specific client, and I looked over and I was like, oh, okay. I gave him like the nod of acknowledgement. He's all. And I was sitting there talking to him, and at first I wasn't really going to say anything because, I don't know what it's like to be in his position, and I don't know if you want to be bothered or not bothered. But eventually I had to. I was like, look, man, I know who you are, and I just got to tell you, I'm a huge fan of yours. Of course, as a kid, and I still am, a huge fan of the Police Academy movies and Shakes the Clown and all the stuff that he did in the 80s. And I asked him, I was like, well, what are you doing in Seattle? And he told me that he was up there working on a movie with Robin Williams, which was the movie, I think it was called Dad of the Year, which is a bag of shit, man. If you've ever seen the movie Dad of the Year, that movie is rough. But it was a fun time. It was a fun conversation talking to Bobcat Goldthwait, because I am a child of the 80s, and he was somebody that was so sort of uniquely 80s in a way. And so I remember telling him, I was like, I saw you in person once before. It was on New Year's Eve, 1994. He's like, Nirvana? I was like, yeah, man. Like, you were there. That's so crazy that... And he basically told me that he was pretty inebriated that night. Didn't remember a whole lot of what had happened that night. It was pretty obvious, if you think back, when he came out on stage at midnight, that he might have been tipping a few or doing a few other things. You never know back in those days. But it was so cool to have that conversation with him. And I told him, I was like, man, I don't want to bug you, but I know who you are. You're awesome. You're awesome, man. And I asked him, I was like, do people recognize you now? Because the 80s were a long time ago. And it's funny, he doesn't look like you'd expect him to look. And he doesn't sound like you'd expect him to sound, because he had that affect that he used on his voice in the 80s. And when you talk to him in person, he's very quiet. He's almost like hard to hear. He's so quiet and soft-spoken. And he told me that people often look at him as if he's like a friend that they used to have. And he's like, I can sometimes see when people then recognize me. He's like, oh, I get it. That's a police academy dick. But that was my later on connection to that show I saw in Nirvana in Oakland. I like the song. It's heavy. It's, it's got elements of grunge. It sort of has this like kind of heavy grunge foundation, but then sitting on top of that, it's got some kind of 60s pop punk, and surf rock kind of like floating on top of it. I actually really like the contrast of the styles on the instrumental track on this record. It's really catchy. I think it is an awesome song. This is probably my second favorite song, at least off of side 2 of this record, but really, like I said before, there isn't a bad song on this entire record, so do yourself a favor. If you haven't, go out and listen to this record, the self-titled record by Bellingham Washington's True Stars. I really don't think you will be disappointed. As for me, I am heading out to San Francisco this week to go see Johnny Marr at the Warfield in San Francisco day after tomorrow. I absolutely cannot wait. I also cannot wait to just put my feet back down in my home area of Oakland and Berkeley. Check out Amoeba Records in both San Francisco and Berkeley. I'm also taking my dad to one of the last ever Oakland A's games this week, which will be sort of bittersweet. I grew up as a huge Oakland A's fan. I remain a sort of casual fan. I'm kind of in a weird place with baseball right now because of the situation. With the Oakland A's, I feel like baseball sort of broke my heart. But I am going to go pay one last tribute to my team and spend one more night in the Oakland Coliseum, a place that is just hugely sentimental for me. So we will be gone all next week here on Archaic Records. I will be back a week from Monday for Morrissey Monday. I will be breaking down the Johnny Marr show out there at the Warfield in San Francisco, as well as taking a look at the new proper vinyl release of his first album, Boom Slang. So I regret to inform you that you will be without my services this week. It's okay. You'll survive. I'll be back. Come on, man. But until then, your homework assignment is to go out and review the material that we covered today. Buy this record. Support this band. At least go out and listen to this record on Spotify. I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed. So go. Do it now! Anyway, thank you so much for checking out this video, man. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. I can't wait to be back in Amoeba Records in San Francisco and Berkeley this week, as well as Melody Records in my hometown of Chico, California. See y'all soon! Check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And I guess that's gonna do her. So until next time, my friends, talk to you then.